Hey there, and welcome to Pointing North, WheatNet Navigator in practical terms. Thank you for watching. In this session, you'll find some recommended Navigator settings and workflows that I've put together for you. They range from basic reminders to more advanced topics, and hopefully they make your job a little bit easier and you more efficient. Maybe you can go home a little bit earlier. Wouldn't that be nice? My name is Neil Ostin. I work for Rogers Sports and Media in Toronto in radio engineering now, but in 2011, when we first started with WheatNet IP, I was in programming and I actually got to use it every day. We built a single studio and control room combination, and ever since then, we've been expanding our use of WheatNet IP so that now it is our entire backbone. We've got lots of experience with it, and for me, I'm a little bit of a script wizard guy too, so if you want to chat about that, I'm happy to do that as well. My contact info will be at the end. Navigator is quite a large, in-depth app, and this session, I hope, will help you uncover some gems that you might not otherwise know about. These are all listed in the manual or help file. I know not everybody reads it, so I'm not going to scold you about that. Maybe you did read the manual or the help file when you first started, but just forgot about some of these things because they weren't essential and you were just still learning. You were taking some baby steps. You didn't want to get overwhelmed. That's possible too. Or maybe you know about these things, but you aren't sure how or why, or maybe even when to use any of them. Now, I think all of these things are good to know, even if you don't use them every day. For me, I'd rather know things that I don't need to know rather than not know things that I do need to know or that make my life easier. The best part about this is if you aren't using one of these things right away in your day-to-day job, you can reference back to this video. Knowing is half the battle, and you can just store that little nugget away, come back and reference this video when you do find that you need to use one of these things. The video will be available for you on my website. I'm going to guess that you have a basic understanding of WheatNet IP, that is, what's a blade, sources and destinations, LIO versus SLIO, all of that kind of thing. I'm going to also guess that you have a working WheatNet IP system, or that at least you've used Nav in the past for simple control and configuration. Maybe you're in a position now where it's not a WheatNet IP plant, but you just like to learn some more about it. I mean, you should have a little bit of experience with a WheatNet system in the back of your pocket. I'm not going to cover the installation of Navigator, and I won't be covering the hardware setup or the connections. That is like the blades, the TS22s, the consoles. I'm not going to talk about the network switch configuration either, but what I will be doing is using Navigator 3.7.6. But if you're not using that same version, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Most of this will be applicable to much of the 3.0 line. And I know that 4.0 is coming, or maybe it's out now. And I think a lot of this stuff will be applicable to that version as well. I'm going to base the examples on a radio environment because that's the one that I'm most familiar with. It's the one that I use every day. Much of the things you learn here can be applied to a Navigator on any WheatNet system though. I have a simple demo environment for us. It has one blade in it. It's hosting a TS22 mic turret, and it's also got an edge device connected. An edge device, it's a specialized unit. It's used for buffering WheatNet IP connections across higher latency networks like wireless STL, that kind of thing. I'm only using it, not for any of that, but because it has digital inputs on it so I can get some audio into it for a demo. The blade that I'm using is an M4 and doesn't have that ability. The thing that I had on the shelf was an edge device, and that's why it's in here. We also have AOIP driver running on a PC. This has been set up like a small radio station, one MCR, there's a 6-fader console in there, 2 microphones, an automation system with 2 outputs. One is the sequential play line, and one is a hotkey output. There's a desktop PC, that's the AOIP driver. There's an on-air phone system that needs a mix minus. You can substitute an IP codec if that works better for you. And there are also speakers in MCR for when the mics are off, of course. And out in the lobby, there's an overhead speaker so we can play a little bit of the radio station at a low level so that when people come into the lobby, they are exposed to the glorious laboriousness of our programming. There's also an equipment room that has the feed that goes out to the general masses out in the real world as well. So let's get into this, and we'll start with something simple, sorting the blade list. The list I'm talking about is the system dock area over here, and I think it shows that by default in Navigator, but if it's not showing for you right now, you can click the system dock button along the top to toggle it. Right now, this system is sorted by name. The AOIP name comes in the alphabet before the blade name. If I wanted to sort by ID, I can easily do that by right-clicking on System, choosing Sort By, and then selecting ID. And in this case, the blade item is ID number 7, and the AOIP item is ID, I think it's 408, but it's way up in the 400s. So again, 7 comes before 408, and so it's sorting by ID. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, at Rogers in Toronto, our blade names tell us the building, the room, the rack, and even the position within the rack. So when we sort by name, all the blades that are close physically are also close within Navigator. And so normally we would sort by name, but sorting by ID lets us figure out the name that matches an ID when we need to do that, or it lets us see if an ID is actually available to use when we bring a new blade onto the system. Here's another simple one, and it's one you might use very frequently. Signal routing is one of the main tasks of Navigator, and in the Crosspoint Map, sources are listed along the top, as you know, destinations down the left side. Did you know that you can sort those? Right-click on the dark square in the upper left corner and choose Sort By, and you can sort the sources by any of these choices that are listed there. If I choose to sort it by blade ID and location, it will change the sort order of those sources, left to right in this case. And I can independently sort the destinations by right-clicking on that square in the upper right corner and choosing Destination Sort By. Let's choose Signal ID in this case. And again, it changed the order of those, and now they are sorted by Signal ID, top to bottom, destinations. Another thing that you can do is show different information on those labels. Right-click on that box again and choose Show, and these are the types of things that you can see. You can just show the name. You can show the name and location of a signal, the name and width, that is, whether it's mono, stereo, that kind of thing, or you can show the signal ID and name. So let's choose signal ID and name just for an example, and you can see that we are now getting the signal ID followed by the name across the sources and destinations. Showing on the labels applies to both sources and destinations, but the sorting can be applied independently, only one or the other. I prefer to sort by name and location on both sources and destinations, and I also like to see that in my list, so I'm going to put it back to that method. But if you want to change this and set it to be a default, you can go to the preferences, and those settings are right there. The blade's default sort order is in the system dock, and the sources and destinations selections are for the Crosspoint Map. Speaking of preferences, we can talk about some coloring of the blades. In this blade list, you'll notice that the text is black all the way through it. And if you wanted to change that color, you definitely can. It's not obvious. But in this Preferences tab under System Preferences, we have some blade preferences listed there. And if we double-click any of these entries, we get a color selection dialog box, and we can select the color just like we would in any other app. I'll pick green for the blade, and I will pick, orange for the AOIP driver, just for an example. And you'll notice now that over here, the blade entry is now green colored text, and the AOIP entry is orange. This color change also shows up in the Crosspoint Map, where the labels are in the appropriate color. It also shows up in the log, where those entries are showing up in that color as well. And it also shows up in one more place, which we'll get to in just a second. You can color the blades any which way you want. Maybe you color them by the station most associated with that particular blade, by location, that is maybe a building or room, something like that, by purpose or how important the blade is. Air chain blades get a very unique color to make them stand out, so it causes you, when you're in the Crosspoint map, to note that you're on an air chain source or destination. You can color them by the type of blade, whether it's a mic blade or an analog blade or a digital blade or a console blade. There are any number of examples you can use. One caveat you should be aware of, though, at least in my version of Navigator, the one that we're looking at now, if I were to close Navigator right now and reload it, my PC driver would revert back to black. I don't know whether that's common across all of the other versions, but in this version it is. And now you can work around that fairly easily by just using black for your AOIP blades and other colors for your other blades. Okay, now it gets a little bit fun. I said I would cover some basic and some more advanced things. I think this is one of the more advanced things, and that's why I like it. A view is what Wheatstone uses to filter the sources and destinations shown on the Crosspoint map. Maybe you only want to see signals in a certain room, or maybe you only want to see logic signals, or maybe you want to see all the sources, but only air chain destinations that are stereo. You can do that. It's easy to set it up in a view, and to do so, you click the Setup View button up along the top. It's appropriately named. Now, normally this is completely empty. I've set up some views already for us so that we have some examples. But let's talk about what's in here, first of all. A filter shows the signals that meet a certain criteria, that is, a location or a type or a blade or a name or a direction or any combination thereof. And then a view is something that consists of one or more filters. And then we have a section on the right which gives us a bit of a preview of what we will see in our Crosspoint map if we were to select that view. In this case, I've got a number of views. My master control only view shows me filters that are available to me, and only the MCR filter is selected right now. It's the only one with a check. And that's a filter that filters by location, beginning with MCR. And if you look at the preview section, the source signals are all in the MCR location, and same with the destination signals. So it's working perfectly. If we wanted to add the equipment room to that view, we would have to make a new view. In this case, the MCR filter is the same as it was before. It's going to filter based on location, beginning with MCR, but we add a new filter that's adding a location based on text starting with equipment room. And as you can see, we have a backup music source now from the equipment room, and we also have a destination in the equipment room called air chain. That's working as well. If we wanted to get a little bit fancier, we can show all of the MCR sources and destinations, but only the equipment room and lobby destinations. And to do that, we built a third view here, and our master control filter is the same as it was before, the one labeled MCR, same as before. We also have an equipment room destination filter we've created, and it's based on location of equipment room, just like the other equipment room was, except we've also applied a second filter to this as well, a second criteria. And it's based on it being a destination as opposed to a source. And so you'll notice that if we go over here, we don't see the backup music source that's in the equipment room anymore listed in the source area, but we still see the equipment room airchain destination. The lobby destination is very similar. It's based on locations that begin with lobby and our destinations, and you'll see that we have added the lobby speaker into that destination. Now, that's all well and good, but how do we actually use these things? Well, if we close out of this window, to change your view in the Crosspoint map, right-click on the upper left black square and choose View, and then you'll see that all the views that we have built here are available to us. So if we only wanted to see the things in MCR, we would select the MCR only view. And all of a sudden, if we do that, the number of sources and destinations gets contained, and we get a much smaller crosspoint map, only containing the things that fit the criteria that we want. And if we wanted to revert back to our original view where we're seeing everything, we would right-click on the upper left box and choose View and choose No View. That is, go back to default. So let's set up a new view. And in this case, let's set up a view that shows us any audio source that is connected to any fader destination. So we'll create a brand new view in this case. We'll click New. And instead of calling it View 01, we'll rename it and call it Faders. And then we'll create a new filter, because the thing that we want to start out with is sources. What kind of sources do we want? We want only audio sources. So we'll click New, and we'll rename it immediately again. Instead of using the default name, we'll call it Audio Sources. And in this case, we want the audio sources. The criteria, one of them is going to be the type of signal. The type that we want is an audio. And we only want sources in this audio sources filter. So we also need to change the direction to be sources. And we will select that as being applicable to this view by placing a check mark in it, and you'll see that we got a whole bunch of source signals instantaneously listed in our preview window. So that's great. Now we don't have any destinations right now though, so let's add some. So again, we need to create a new filter, and we'll rename this filter. We'll call it Faders again. And this Faders filter will be based upon name, and the name of the faders all begin with the word fader. Fader 1, Fader 2, Fader 3, Fader 4, Fader 5, Fader 6, etc., that kind of thing. And we only need them to be the destinations that begin with the word fader. So let's do that. And we'll apply this filter to the faders view as well by placing a check mark. And now all of a sudden we get a list of destination signals that we can use that will appear in our view when we go to select it. If we leave our setup view window and go back to our crosspoint map and right click on that upper left square and choose a view that is faders, we will see all of the audio sources in our system. Notice there is no logic there, and only the fader destinations present. So now we have a very nice, simple view that we can use to direct our crosspoints to the right place. Now, filters are additive only. They're not subtractive. That means I can't say, I would like to show all of the signals except. I have to build up the filters individually and then add them together as part of the view. Good filters to build are one for each blade in your system. That's good, because if you're working with a couple of blades, maybe 2 or 3, or maybe just one blade, you can just build a temporary view, and then inside that temporary view, select the blades that you're working on, and then select that view in your crosspoint map, and those will only be the blades that you can see. The signals on those blades will be the only ones that you see in your system. Another good thing to build is an LIO only view. Only show me logic signals, or an audio only view. Only show audio. If you're working with only one of those things, you don't need to see the other one. Another good thing to do is, if you've got a non-engineering type navigator user on your system, you can give them a simpler view of the things that they need to see, very similar to what we've built here for faders, that kind of thing. And if you do have someone like that, you might be interested in the preferences over here. You can set the default view for an instance of Navigator on that particular machine that they are using, and that can help them great. They can always go back and right click and choose to view no view, which gives them everything again. But to start with, they're going to be in a slightly more contained view, only showing them the things that they need in order to do their job easily. Associated connections are a way to tell your WheatNet system, when I connect a specific source to a specific destination, I also want you to make other crosspoint changes as well. For example, you could route the mix minus to the phone whenever the phone is connected to the third fader on the console. It's a very simple, common thing, and it's very easy to do it. To do an associated connection, go to System, Associated Connections, and you'll see that there are two sections here. There's a triggered connection, and then on the right, there's an associated connection. The triggered connection is the initial Crosspoint connection that kicks the whole thing off. So in this case, it would be the part in the example I gave where I connect the phone to the third fader. So let's build that. Add, choose destination as fader number 3, and my source is going to be the phone. And now on my right side, I have a list that it's currently empty, but of all of the various connections that will be applied at the same time whenever phone is connected to fader 3 in the Crosspoint map. So in this case, I want to feed the mix minus from the console back to the phone. So we'll go add. My destination in this case is the phone. It's going back to the caller. And my source is going to be called MCR MXM. Now there's a lock override here. If the destination in any of these is locked, the change will not happen on that specific destination. If you check the lock override box there, it will override the lock that's in place. So use that very carefully. Now, click the apply button to make it active so it's ready to go. And if I go to the Crosspoint map and I disconnect my mix minus from my phone, and I disconnect the phone from fader 3, and I connect anything else over there, nothing happens to the mix minus going to the phone Crosspoint down here. But the instant that I connect phone to fader 3, we get this other Crosspoint happening here, directing the mix minus to the phone, which is exactly what we want. Notice that there was, in the associated connection triggered connection, there was a disconnect source that's available there. That means when I don't select anything to that destination, what do I want to have happen? An instance of that is if you always wanted to have something connected to a specific destination. So for example, in this case, if I always wanted to have something being fed to the air chain, I can do that. And I do it exactly what's on my screen here now. My destination being the air chain and my source being disconnect. If I disconnect anything from going to the air chain, that is, nothing is being fed there, I would like to feed, I don't know, backup music there or something. So I'll select for my destination, air chain, and for my source will be backup music. And I will click OK, and I will apply that. And if I go over to the Crosspoint map, and again, if I change my Crosspoint going into the air chain to be the source that is the automation system sequential play line, that's AutoPL, goes to the air chain, cool, everything's great. If I can feed the backup music there, everything's great. If I feed the PC there, no problem. If I don't feed anything there, that is, I get rid of this Crosspoint, the PC to air chain entirely, it will automatically sense that and feed backup music there so that something's on the air all the time. Salvos are kind of similar to associated connections. The difference is that a salvo doesn't need a specific connection to kick it off, to get it going. It can just be fired whenever it's needed. In this case, the salvos are in the System Salvos Macros tab, and I've built a couple here again as well. I built an Air MCR salvo that is going to take the MCR program and feed it to the air chain. It also takes the MCR program and feeds it to the lobby speaker. This looks very similar to the Crosspoint map, but it's not. It's the salvo edit screen, and anything that you do here in this specific section only happens when you fire the associated salvo. So only if I click the fire button will any of this changes happen. These are not live changes. These are the changes that are actually happening, or what will happen if I actually make the salvo run. In this case, I also want to point out the details dock on the side. And again, if that isn't visible for you, you can click the detail dock up in the top. And it shows you whenever you select a new salvo, the details will change in it. It's showing you the source and destination cross points that will happen when this salvo runs. And this is the same information that's over here, just presented slightly differently. I have another salvo. It's called Air Auto. And in this case, I take the automation system and feed it directly to the air chain. And I also have a blue line down here, and that means I disconnect anything from being fed to the lobby. In this case, if I were to run this salvo, nothing would be connected to the lobby. Whatever was connected there would be disconnected. To do that, you can't click anywhere. You have to right-click on the destination and choose Disconnect Destination. You can do this for any of the other ones as well. If you wanted to disconnect some of the other things as well, you could definitely do that. To run the salvo, I talked about one way to do it, and it's select a salvo in this screen and click the fire button. Another way to do it is from the Crosspoint section. You can right-click on the dark colored square in the upper left corner and choose Fire Salvo, and then select a salvo you want to have run. And the third way to do it is to use a logic on a blade. So to do that, you go to the blade, you go to the LIO info tab, and in my case, I've selected some software LIO coming from the automation system itself, so that the on-air people can select a button in their automation system, press a button over there, and it will bypass the console and put the automation system directly to air, or put their console back on the air. And to do that, I've set up a couple of SLIOs here. One of them is going to set the master control to be on the air, and the other one's going to set the automation system to be on the air directly. To do that, you can find the Fire Salvo column for that specific logic, double-click it, check the Fire Salvo button, and then select the salvo you want to fire when that logic is active. And I'll do the same for the other salvo here, so that we can put the automation system directly to air. And I'm ready to go. Now, when the soft LIO is active, that pulse goes active coming in to the blade, we will run either an air MCR salvo or an air auto salvo, depending on which one goes active. They don't need to be latched. They act upon the rising edge of the pulse or the latching. So if you latch it, it just does it the once. You don't need to keep it being latched. A pulse will do it just fine. So let's build a salvo as well. We want to build a salvo here in this case to put our sources onto faders that would be default selections that we would choose. So if somebody comes in and messes up or changes all the sources on the faders, we can put them back very quickly to a default state. And in that case, I'm going to go back to the salvo screen. I'm going to make a new salvo. That's hit the new button. And I'm going to instantly rename it. I've got to give it a good name so I know what it is. So I'm going to call it MCR default, because we're going to put the MCR faders back to a default state. Click OK. And this editable button has got that light blue tinge to it. And that means that anything that I do down here will actually have an effect. It will make that be part of the salvo. So in my case, I'm going to put the Auto PL on fader 1. So I just simply click there. And I'm going to put the Auto HK on fader 2. Let's put the phone on fader 3. We'll put the PC on fader 4. And let's put the mics on faders 5 and 6. And that's the extent of my defaults that I want to apply there. So I will unselect the editable button there, and it goes to a sort of a normal gray tinge to it as opposed to a blue background. And if I wanted to run that, well, I would go over to the Crosspoint, and somebody came in and changed everything on us. We don't know where anything is. I'm just going to randomly select some things here. So that we've got a bit of a mess on our hands. And I'm also going to take the mix minus away from the phone as well, just as an example. So now if we right click and fire salvo MCR default, it will not only put all the faders back to their normal state, but because the phone is now being fed to master control fader number 3, that means the associated connection kicked in, and it fed the mix minus back to the phone. So you can use them in combination with each other. Let's do a couple of quick hits in the preferences section. There are a couple things that I like to do when I first get started. The first thing that I like to do when I install Navigator is check the use control click to make or break a Crosspoint connection box there. And the reason I like to do that is because I've got a large system, scroll bars that go on for days. And if I'm scrolling around and I accidentally click somewhere in the Crosspoint grid, I don't want the signal to change. I want to have to actually press control to make sure that I'm making a change rather than just clicking somewhere accidentally and doing it. With touchscreens now on laptops and other devices, you may be using Navigator on something like that. And in those cases, without this box checked, you can sneeze and knock yourself off the air. And you definitely don't want that. That's a bad thing. The other thing that I like to do is use dotted signals for the IDs, this top checkbox here. And the reason I like that is because I like dotted signals better. I follow them better. I can understand that 7030 is something on blade 7 in the utility mixer rather than whatever the hexadecimal code is for that same signal. Dotted signals work a lot better for me. I can always see the hexadecimal signal if I need to in the details view, but dotted signals work a lot easier for me. That's why I like them. And they're usable across scripts, and they're a lot easier to do over there as well. One other thing you might want to consider doing is adjusting your colors for your Crosspoint dots themselves. You can also adjust the levels for the audio, where the audio colors change on the Crosspoint dots. And if you don't know what those Crosspoint dots mean, well, let's talk about that. A single square is only logic. A single circle is a mono source being fed to a mono destination. Two circles at a 45-degree angle to each other are a stereo source to a stereo destination. Two circles on top of each other, stacked, is a mono source being fed to a stereo destination. And two circles side by side, that's a stereo source being fed to a mono destination. You can think of the circles as being channels, and for a stereo channel, source or destination, those circles are arranged in such a way so that they are meaning that it's a stereo source or a stereo destination or a mono source or a mono destination. They're just rotated around a little bit to make that easier. The log, we touched upon it earlier. It's going to show you what's happening within your WheatNet system. That is, any blade communication messages that come across. A new blade comes on board. You've got some master votes happening, clock errors, crosspoint changes. If you run a salvo, you'll see it in the log as well. One of the things that you might consider doing, especially on large systems, is increasing the maximum number of lines. And that's done down here. If you click the set button, you can specify it. I don't know what the default is when you first install Navigator, but for us on a fairly large system, we have over 100 blades. We've got a number of consoles as well. There's a lot of action happening on this system. And 20,000 lines lasts about 3 hours within this view itself. You can scroll up and down here, of course, but it runs about 3 hours. If it's a very busy system, a very busy time, it will, of course, be less. But as a baseline, that's what you get out of it. If you run into a problem on your system, this is the place that you really want to come. And one of the first things you want to do is zip the logs so that you have a copy of them for safekeeping, or maybe you need to send them off to someone to look at. So to do that, you can hit the zip button, and then you can specify how many days back you want to go. 7 days is default, but you may only want to see back a day or two. You can just simply adjust it there. And then you can click the start button, and it will save all of the logs that it's got in Navigator. It will store them into this folder so that you can go access it and send them or do what you wish with them. The other thing that I like to do is click this copy all button. And the reason I do that is so I can paste it into a notepad document, save that document, and store that as well. And what it does is it copies the entire section of the log screen here up above. And the reason I do that is because not everything that's written to the log screen is also written to the text files that are made up of the zips. There are certain things that only appear in this screen that we're looking at now, like announce messages. And if those are what is triggering the issue to occur, this may be the only way that you actually see them. And that's part of the reason why I like to boost the number of lines, so we have a little bit of history. We don't just losing it within 5 or 10 minutes. You can filter on this screen. It's the use filters section, and then if you go into the filters, you can only see certain blades or messages or columns if that's what you want to do. The auto scroll checkbox is something that I normally leave checked, but sometimes I need to uncheck it because on a very active system, auto scroll will always try to show the most recent message towards the bottom. So this scrolly box up top will constantly try to be pulled to the most recent message. And if you uncheck it, it will let you scroll up and down and read something. Well, new messages still appear down below, but it won't try to snap down to them. Something else that you should definitely consider doing, in my view, is checking out the Blade driver version check, and that's in the System Info tab. It's right over here. There are actually two of them. There's a Blade version check and there's a PC driver version check. And this is probably set to mark versions, in your case, maybe set to none by default, I believe. But I like to change it to not equal to, and then set my version number that I'm using on my blades and do the same on the PC driver version. And the reason I do that is because I can instantly know whether a blade or an AOIP driver is out of date or not the same as all of the other blades on my system. It gives a large red indicator on the blade itself so that you can see it. In this case, I've set the system to mark versions of firmware on blades that are not equal to 3.7.6, and this is running 3.7.7, and so therefore I get not only a large red circle for my system as an overall to say, hey, there's something wrong with this, it's different, but I also get a red indicator on all the blades that don't fit that criteria. So that's very useful. Now you can see this in the version manager as well. You can see firmware is listed over there. But I like to do it through the Blade version check or the PC driver version check because that information then is delivered to me rather than me having to go look for it. I want to draw your attention to the date and time on your WheatNet system. The NTP time setting is one that I recommend. This setup down here is not related to the clock master. The clock master is used to keep samples and network packets in line. This is just simply the date and time on your system. So it appears in logs and that kind of thing. It appears on blades and on TS22s, all of those type of things. It won't update Screen Builder. Because Screen Builder references the time from the computer itself. But otherwise, it's going to update most clocks on your WheatNet system. It's useful for logs and monitoring, really, just so that everything's on the same time. For example, you may have some audio issues. Comparing the Navigator logs to the actual audio on a logger, if the times are in sync between those two things, that is the logger and the logs in Navigator, it's going to make your life a lot easier because you will actually be able to follow through what's happening in your log and compare it to the audio on the logger. I recommend syncing to an NTP server. You may have a dedicated device or unit on your WheatNet IP network that's you use for this, and if so, it's very easy. Or you can set up a PC to do that. A PC running Navigator all, or at least most of the time, is recommended. Loading of Navigator can take a bit of time, especially on a large system, and of course logging, we've just talked about that. It's happening all the time, and if you're constantly logging, you do have something to fall back on if you need to see what went on. And so installing an NTP server on the PC that is also running Nav most of the time is a good way to set yourself up with an NTP server if you don't have one otherwise. A piece of software that's free that you can use for this is called NetTime. It's available at the website there, and you can install it on that PC. One thing you do want to do if you can is disable the Windows time sync if possible. That prevents conflicts between the Windows time synchronization and the net time software, time synchronization. You will also want to open up the firewall port. It's a UDP traffic, NTP traffic is, and it's port 123. And then just set your, in Navigator, set your adjustment to be NTP and apply the appropriate IP address for that PC that you're using to run the net time software, and then apply the appropriate offset. And away you go. You can visit the NetTime website for other configuration details, but that's a good way to at least get started. It runs as a service, so you don't have to worry about actually running the application. The last thing I want to talk about is backups. Remember to do backups. WheatNet IP is a distributed system. The configuration is stored on each blade for redundancy, of course, but having a snapshot of the system means you can restore something if you accidentally removed it. If you go and delete a source from a blade, that change will replicate across your entire system, and it will be gone if you only rely on the backup within the blade. You'll have to recreate it. You can store a copy on another PC or off-site as well, doing it that way. And the backup procedure is very simple. It's under the config section. You can select your config folder, and then it's very simple. All you have to do is click the backup button in the backup system configuration, and it will ask you, are you sure you want to back everything up? And the answer is yes. It will create a folder and walk through your system and back it up. In this case, it's a very fast backup, but it doesn't take usually much longer than just a few seconds. In this case, there's my folder, and I can then go into that folder and copy it to another machine or a USB drive or whatever I want. And that does it, the end of the session. I hope you found something you can put to use. If not right away, at least you know about it, and you can return to refresh your memory whenever you're ready, whenever you find you absolutely do need that information. Again, my name is Neil Ostin. You can rewatch this video, like I mentioned, anytime at my website, neilostin.com. If you have some comments or you'd like to chat about radio, or maybe you've got some questions about WheatNet IP I didn't cover, or Wheatstone scripting in general, you can hit me up by email anytime. I'm happy to do that. Just email hello@neilostin.com. I'm so glad you were here to watch. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time. This has been Pointing North, WheatNet Navigator in practical terms.